We must disable that crane.
Kill them all! Oh my god, this feels good! I cannot express the sheer freaking joy I currently have at this time, because holy Christ. This feels exactly how I would want a 40k game to be.
Hi, I'm Sam, and welcome to Late to the Party, a new look at old media using some pretty old tech. There are very few creators here on YouTube that have impacted me the way Total Biscuit did. His WTF series covered hundreds of video games throughout the years, using his more first impression style of critique rather than the traditional review. His wit, brutal honesty, and overall personality really impacted the way I feel about video games into my adult life. The clips you saw in the beginning were taken from his WTF is Space Marine video taken way back in 2011. Up until that point, I'd never seen him get so giddy about a video game. He rambled about every single detail and shouted out lore facts like the expert he was. He made the world of 40k sound so exciting, and this just further brought intrigue into the game itself. Plus, I mean, it helped it look pretty damn brutal. I hadn't even heard about Warhammer 40,000 at all up to this point, yet he made every detail of it sound so damn cool. As I would later figure out, 40k started as, and primarily still is, a miniature war game originally created by Games Workshop in the late 1980s, one I have still yet to play. And I figured with the relatively recent announcement of Space Marine 2 some dozen or so years later, it would be a great time to look back on the original and see why it had such an impact on me in the first place, and how not only is it a great representation of the massive lore in the franchise, but how it can serve as almost a jumping off point to those with even an inkling of interest in 40k. Let's get into it. In order to understand just about everything I'm about to talk about, a little bit of backstory is necessary. In brief, it's the year 40,000, and humanity has grown into numbering into the trillions, colonizing millions of different worlds and spreading to every edge of the known galaxy. At the centerpiece is the God Emperor of mankind, a being of overwhelmingly high psychic power ruling from his golden throne on Holy Terra. Viewed by all of humanity as their creator, protector, and immortal reigning monarch, he once stood as the greatest example of order and endurance in the face of absolute horror. However, he now remains entombed in his throne, kept only alive by the daily sacrifice of thousands of lives in order to sustain the advanced machinery keeping him in stasis. This is where he remains now, sitting, unmoving for the last 10,000 years, kept between life and death, existing in a perpetual cycle of his own endless, undying hellscape. For it's due to his own continued existence that humanity can be safely guided through the warp, a sort of interdimensional highway used to obtain faster-than-light-speed travel between worlds, something of infinite value to mankind for survival. It also just so happens to be a dimension of pure chaos energy, home to horrors beyond all human comprehension. 40k's own version of what hell probably is. It's also home to the 4 chaos gods that are all vying for the total obliteration of mankind. So yeah, it's pretty useful not to get lost in all that. During the God Emperor's reign, he led his people throughout the Great Crusade, a galaxy-wide subjugation and colonization of millions of worlds, with the end goal of unifying all of mankind under his banner. To aid in this massive undertaking, the Emperor created the Adeptus Astartes, better known as the Space Marines. Space Marines are the textbook definition of a super soldier, taken at a young age to be heavily physically and mentally augmented, and deeply indoctrinated to be an instrument of the Emperor's divine will. Putting this universe into perspective, despite the trillions of humans spread throughout the galaxy, Space Marines are so rare amongst the average person that they are often seen as holy figures. To see one is to see an angel of the Emperor. Using weapons and equipment specifically designed for their massive frames, they cut down any who would dare stand in their way. Bred and trained to be the ultimate machine of death and violent willpower, Space Marines are about 1 in 33 million people. Because the initiation process is so often seen as a death trap, to be chosen for one is seen as a great honor and sacrifice to the Imperium. And while there were massive successes early on, often referred to as the Golden Age, It was due to the corruption of Horus, the Emperor's favorite son, that a galaxy-wide civil war broke out, and this was only stopped due to the death of Horus at the God Emperor's hand. This, however, ended up being what caused the Emperor to be entombed in his golden throne in the first place. Without his guidance, the Imperium devolved into what it is now, an age of heavily divided, xenophobic, paranoid, zealous warmongers who devote every action to the overall survival of mankind unto itself, no matter the cost. In the grim dark of the far future, there is only ever war. War against the constant threats to the Imperium. If you are not deemed faithful, you are branded a heretic, and will be destroyed. This brings us to the game in question, Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. A frankly underrated, arcadey, third-person shooter styled much in the way of Gears of War, minus that game's snappy cover system, but in its place, a simple yet ultimately satisfying melee combat system. Stepping into the boots of Captain Titus of the Ultramarines chapter, your mission is to cleanse the Forge World of Graia of a recent orc infestation that has left the world unable to continue in the war effort. While various options are contemplated, including the planet's total destruction, it's deemed that the Titan-class war machine is too valuable of an asset to destroy. The game itself is pretty welcoming to people who have no knowledge about 40k lore at all. It's simple enough to wrap your head around what is happening, and has enough fan service to appease the hardcore fan and newcomer alike. As you move Titus around, you'll quickly realize the sheer weight and size you have to control over. With every thundering step, every exploding shell of your bolter, and every orc gourd, you will feel nothing but the absolute power fantasy it was meant to be. It's not long before this game makes you feel like an absolute walking tank. However, this does not make you invincible, and you really do have to sometimes think about your approach. Your shields recover, but in order to recover your actual health, special execution moves must be performed, showering Titus in a red stream of alien bits that somehow restore his vitals. Does it make sense? Not really. Then again, none of this really does, and that's sort of half the fun.
Is that wise, Captain? The Codex Astartes does not support this action.
Diving straight into battle, Titus quickly shows his expertise, cutting down swaths of orc on his way down to the planet's surface, armed with nothing more than a combat knife, bigger than a claymore, and small by this universe's standards, 75 caliber bolter pistol. I think this game impacted me so much due to just how brutal it is. Much of the combat is based around those melee attacks, and while it can get a little repetitive, thankfully, the game gives you plenty of chances to change your loadout to keep it from getting too stale, simultaneously giving you yet another piece of massive lore to learn about in your own time, should you choose to. Seriously, this universe has so much effing lore. After that intense intro, Titus lands on the planet's surface and meets up with his squad mates, the younger, more cautious Leandros.
The Codex Astartes warns against using jump packs to leap blindly into enemy fire, and for good reason.
Your days as a novice are behind you.
And the grizzled veteran, Sidonus.
Sergeant, I see you found something to keep you busy.
Worry not, Captain. I've saved some orcs for you.
Early on, the narrative isn't afraid to remind you about the absolute devastation surrounding you. This industrial forge world has been reduced to an absolute war zone. And for as overpowered as the combat may make you feel, you're still only a singular combatant. The game does have its slower moments, and in them, it's not afraid to show you the human side of the horrific battle. Bodies are just casually laying out in the open. Living quarters are just straight up abandoned, and many audio logs can be found telling of the suffering and fear going through the inhabitants.
I want to be strong, to say everything's alright, but it's not. The dead are everywhere. Stinking, rotting. We burn bodies where we can, but the fire attracts more orcs. If you stop and think about it, billions dead here, you'll go mad. But no matter where you go, you find the people of this world, all dead, all waiting for help that never came.
When you come across a makeshift infirmary, one of the dying guardsmen even considers himself lucky to have even seen a space marine before he succumbs.
I got to see a space marine before the end. God Emperor, watch over those who fight in your name.
Luck, maybe, but the haunting thing is, Astartes are only ever sent to the most hellbound of worlds, and most chapters don't even care about human life, seeing themselves as above human. Some even have a no-witness policy, guarding their existence in general from most of mankind. Not Titus, however. As a member of the Ultramarines chapter, he is amongst a handful of the more honorable chapters, and thankfully thinks a little bit more about the regular humans, and admires their fighting spirit multiple times in this game.
My lord, you have saved us.
Rise, guardsmen. You saved yourselves. We thought you did.
As satisfying as it is to gun down endless hordes of orcs, it's in the dialogue that the grim truth is alluded to you. You're not here to rescue or liberate anyone. The Ultramarines were simply set to prevent the Titan from falling into enemy hands. That's it. The human population has been reduced from billions to only a few hundred in a matter of weeks. The lives of those who remain are deemed an acceptable loss in the eyes of the Imperium, and the only reason the planet wasn't turned into space dust were the weapons being developed there.
I'm coming aboard.
Yes, Captain.
As powerful as the game makes the player feel, this is the ultimate undertone of it. Billions of human lives aren't equivalent to superweapons, especially when that superweapon can crush entire planets by itself. You're eventually introduced to Inquisitor Drogan, a member of a very shady organization behind the scenes whose entire existence is to find ways of destroying the enemies of the Imperium. Though heavily wounded, he guides Titus through the battle zones in an attempt to keep the orcs from acquiring a power source that he says powers the Psychic Scourge, a weapon that can target various Xenos nervous systems and can brutally dispatch them in a cloud of explosive gore.
It is a noble and worthy...
Stench of aliens permeates this facility, but it is tolerable because it represents progress. I acquired specimens for experimentation. Orc, Tau, Eldar. Even a Tyranid Lictor, which nearly caused a revolt among my tech priest allies. I designed the weapon to use the warp energies to target the weak points in the Xenos brain and rupture them. That is the tidy theory. When I put it into practice, however, the specimen's head explodes. Distasteful, but effective. The weapon works.
A weapon that, at this point in time, could hold absolute invaluable use to the Imperium if properly developed. Titus and his squad make it their mission to secure the device, as it's powered by the dark chaos energy of the warp itself, that if accidentally unleashed, could crack the planet in half. With a horde of orcs between you and the weapon, you inevitably get to explore the bleakness of the world around you. This is a factory world, home to billions of workers expected to aid in the war effort. You walk through their quarters, collect audio logs from them, and get to witness their last stand. If you pay attention, even the intercom will announce that certain workers are still expected to work, regardless of the orcs' onslaught.
The increase in worker absences has been noted. Delinquent workers will be disciplined.
Families are separated, hope is dwindling, and the awe-inspiring fighting force of the average person is the only reason they have lasted so long.
Been diverted to a forge world under orc attack. The defenders are all dead. The orcs are killing everyone on the planet. We're the only Imperial Guard in the sector. Fleet's on the way, but are a couple of weeks out. Looking for a hard fight.
Another grim, if not clever, nod to the theme once again. However, even with his grit and determination to continue, it's revealed that an even more sinister plot is brewing. As it turns out, Drogan's heavily clawed chest wound was, indeed, fatal. He's just been an undead puppet since you first met him, secretly a conduit for one of humanity's greatest fears, the manifested forces of chaos.
I see. My servant did all that I hoped and more. But he would never have succeeded without you. Captain Titus.
The weapon's real purpose now twisted into not destroying the enemies of man, but summoning some of the worst of them instead. The vile legions of demons and traitors, led by their Prince Nemeroth, start to quickly infest Graia. Now caught in a three-way war between the orcs and Hellspawn, you are now left with the only option you have. Reinforcements aren't here yet, and the portal is widening. You must use the power source to supercharge the Titan war machine and obliterate the portal's power source before this world is completely overrun. Little easier said than done.
Did that fiend speak truth? Did we cause a chaos invasion? Of course we did.
After repainting much of Graia a new shade of crimson, Titus at last catches up with Nemeroth, who at this point has fought with the orc leader, spawned untold thousands of abominations, and skewered your comrade. He has been consistently taunting Titus about his failures, and now it's time for some vengeance.
As a slave to chaos, nothing you say could tempt me from the path of honor, or from avenging the deaths of my battle brothers.
Even after utterly destroying the bastard, his presence still lingers, all but confirming that Titus does have some unknown connection to chaos, adding more questions than answers at the conclusion of the player's journey. Even after all the conflict, despite single-handedly murdering orc war boss Grimskull and putting a stop to this world's invasion, and witnessing the death of his comrade, it's Titus's own battle brother Leandros that tells of his surprising resistance to chaos energy to the Inquisition superiors and their Black Templar Space Marines. Remember what I said about zealotry in this world?
I am no heretic.
You lie! Only an agent of chaos can withstand such warp exposure.
I sent the demon to oblivion.
But did you have unholy assistance? We must know.
The youngest of your squad makes his opinion clear from the first time Titus is exposed, but his concerns are disregarded due to the fact that they were sort of under the threat of death at any second right then.
Codex warns that those in league with chaos can withstand the warp's touch.
You forget yourself, Ultramarine. Leandros, I do not take this warp resistance lightly, but the search for answers must wait until after we deal with this chaos invasion.
What if that is too late? Leandros, enough. We need to keep moving.
It's only after his separation from Titus towards the end of the campaign that he secretly tells of his concern to the higher orders. Regardless of all Titus has done on Graia, he has surrendered to the Imperium due to the Codex Astartes, basically the Space Marines' fusion of the Art of War and the Bible, brandishing resistance to chaos energy, a symptom of chaos influence itself. Titus is deemed a suspected heretic and is given the choice of either brutal interrogation or total annihilation of himself and his chapter, completely disgracing his brothers.
Leave my brothers and the lieutenant alone. I will come with you. I do not know why I can resist the touch of chaos, but I swear I will discover the truth.
We will discover many truths, Space Marine.
Codex Astartes leaves no room for doubt. You cannot touch the warp and emerge unscathed.
The Codex Astartes is a set of rules. They guide us, shape us as Ultramarines, teach us to hold duty and honor sacred above all. But how we live with those rules is the true test of a Space Marine. And you have failed.
Titus leaves the planet not as a hero, but is a shamed warrior. And this is just another example of the overall theme of 40k. There really aren't any good guys. True that there are morally better people who exist, and honestly the real heroes here are probably just the average guardsman. But overall, every faction has done irreconcilable acts of violence and hatred for one reason or another. Why is it that something so grim and depressing is so fascinating? Honestly, in my opinion, it's sort of like heavy metal music. It's a power fantasy that's not afraid to make fun of itself. For every deadly superweapon, there's another bigger, deadlier superweapon. It's consistently one-upping itself in its scale of absolute ridiculousness, while also somehow having very grounded moments of heroism and horror at the same time. It really all depends who is writing the story.
Target the orbital spire.
Target acquired.
Firing now.
Every single faction, whether it's the Space Marines, the Orcs, Chaos, the common Astra Militarium soldier, or one of the many other factions not seen in this game, every one has amazing stories behind them, and every little detail has some sort of lore surrounding it. To me, the best thing to take away from Warhammer 40,000 lore is to simply fight on. Fight in the face of overwhelmingly high resistance and keep going, despite the odds.
Destroy these Chaos forces. I must reach the orbital spire.
Yes, sir.
Space Marine itself is, when you break it down, a satisfying game that makes the player feel powerful and has an easy-to-digest story to back it up that can easily be a stepping stone for newcomers into this universe. As for the more hardcore fan, it can be considered a love letter to the franchise. I can only hope that the upcoming sequel will contain just as much heart as this one did. This is a game made by fans, for fans. Honor and glory.
None shall find us wanting.
Honor and glory, Bloodbraven.
If you've made it this far in the video and would like to learn more about the absolutely massive lore that entangles 40k, and you don't feel like reading the endless wiki pages like I do for fun, I'd highly recommend a channel here on YouTube called Warhammer. I've learned so much more about the lore from him over the last couple of years, and he makes every story both engaging and incredibly interesting to listen to. I'll give him some support and tell him I said hi. And with the relatively recent announcement that Henry Cavill, best known as Hollywood Super Nerd, is executively producing and starring in a 40k series for Amazon soon. Something I'm admittedly pretty damn hyped for, considering how Cavill walked away from The Witcher due to those producers pretty much spitting on the source material. So honestly, there really isn't a better time to start looking into 40k if I've convinced you yet. If you like my content, however, and would like to see more from me, definitely hit that like button, subscribe, and comment down below your thoughts on this awesomely, ridiculously violent universe. It would really help out my channel a lot. Oh, and expect more videos soon. I promise it won't be another 2.5 years until the next one. Life has a funny way of re-engaging this spark. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, if you're late to the party, it's still going on. So you might as well enjoy yourself. I'll see you next time.